Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever felt you've lost your way, then do we have the Lion Tracker's Guide to Life show for you. Today I'll be talking with Boyd Varty, master life coach, author, and TED speaker. He runs retreats that merge tracking, coaching, and storytelling at the Londolozi Game Reserve in South Africa, and the author of my favorite book of 2019, The Lion Tracker's Guide to Life. And that's just what I want to talk with him about going deep inside, finding your wilder self, and rediscovering your gift, your purpose, and your life mission. That plus we'll talk about the genius of the marula trees, the Pell's fishing owl, stories of Big Black, who on earth is Majomban, and what in the world faded khaki pants, a T-Salve Ranger shirt, and Velschoons with different laces has to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Boyd. Are you ready to shine?
Hey, Michael. Great to be with you. What a pleasure to be here.
It is so great to have you on the show. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about your story. Then we're going to talk about the how-to side of things. But before we dive right into things, would you mind telling or sharing with us, what does a lion's roar mean to you?
My goodness, when a lion roars in that pre-dawn darkness, the way that I can describe it is you feel a dormant part of yourself wake up. And you know that for thousands of years around fires in wild places, the human animal would hear that roar out on the savannah. And it immediately sparks something incredibly primal. And you know, humans actually evolved with lions. One of the primary ways that when we were still hunter-gatherers, one of the primary ways that we got our meat is we would track lions. And when we found them on their kill on the savannas of Africa, we would run in and try and chase them off the kill and then cut ourselves a piece of meat. And so there's this ancient connection between humans and lions. And when you hear that call, you feel something very ancient and very wild wake up inside of you.
Wow. And now your family, who has had a preserve, if that's the right term, for 3 generations, for a while, they actually did this, which was to track them. First, they tracked them for the animals themselves, but later they would track them for the kill.
Yeah, so I feel like my family's history has been deeply connected with lions. Because in 1926, my great-grandfather bought this property, which was this wild, bankrupt cattle farm adjacent to the Kruger National Park. And one of the reasons the farms were bankrupt is because it was this old, low rainfall area. It was very difficult to run cattle on. But another reason they were bankrupt is that the lions were eating the cattle. The consciousness that they were in at that time, my great-grandfather was a hunter. Yeah. And he originally went there to hunt lions. And that's what my family did for 3 generations until my father and my uncle went through a kind of a transformation in their consciousness, and they woke up to a different way of being. And the lions that had called us to this piece of land to hunt them, well, then they facilitated the transition of this place from a hunting reserve into the creation of a game reserve, a place where the animals would be protected, a place where we could rebuild our connection with the natural world, a place where we could restore a kind of harmony and a unity. And so although we went there initially to hunt lions, ultimately the lions calling us there resulted in a very deep and beautiful healing.
I have got to ask about that. You said your father and uncle underwent a transformation of consciousness. What does that mean?
Well, what happened on this bankrupt cattle farm, the land was overrun with scrub. What happens when the land had been abused by too much cattle on the land, the grass had been stripped bare. Yeah. And when the grass gets stripped bare, as the water falls, instead of soaking down into the soil, it runs off. Mm-hmm. And then the land responds by sending up a thick mat of scrub. And so huge sections of that property when we arrived there were eye-high scrub. You couldn't see anything. Then when my grandfather died and my father and uncle inherited the piece of land, they decided that they were going to try and get a safari business going. And, you know, it was an incredibly derelict piece of land. There were no animals to be seen. You could go there and spend days and days walking around and not see an animal. And if you did see a lion or a leopard, it was desperately trying to get away from you. But they were young and they were passionate and they felt deeply connected with this piece of land. And, kind of in the miraculous way that things happen, into the story came a man called Ken Tinley. And Ken was this fascinating character. He was a high school dropout who had got himself admitted to a university biological sciences degree because he drew a picture of a moth with such intricate detail that the dean of the faculty put him in. And so he got himself through a biological sciences degree. Yeah. And then he went and lived by himself in a reserve in Mozambique, this huge expanse of land in Mozambique. And he lived there for a number of years by himself. And during that time, Ken went through a transformation. He could feel the rivers flowing in his own veins. He could feel the earth breathing. And he started to learn how the rainfall affected the fauna and flora and how the moisture moved across the landscape. And he was in such deep union with the land that it's like he could feel it speaking inside of him. And then the war broke out in Mozambique and he ran for his life. And he found his way to Londolozi, where these two young boys, my father and uncle, were getting this ragtag safari business going on this piece of land that was invaded with scrub. And he said to them, if you want this place to come to life, you need to partner with the land. You need to think of the animals as your kin. And you need to make sure that the local people who live in this area participate in the protection of these wild areas. And so they said to him as young boys, they said, well, what do you mean partner with the land? And he said, come, I'll show you. And he took them out onto the landscape and he showed them where the scrub had come up. Always, if you walk to the lowest point where the land fell away, you would find a deep ravine where the moisture was being lost. And he showed them that if you could clear that scrub away and go and pack it in that ravine where you were losing the moisture, it was kind of like putting the plug back in. And when the rain fell, instead of the water running off, it started to solidify and go down into the soil. And so they started this work of working on the land, clearing the scrub, packing it into where they were losing the moisture. And with this intention to heal and reconnect with the land, suddenly the land started to come back to life. And, that's one of the great privileges of my life, was to grow up inside of a restoration, to grow up inside of a piece of land that had actually been brought back to its natural environment. And so that's a little bit of that story.
I've almost got tears because we live on a piece of land that's considered unusable with a deep ravine and scrub where they used to grow cattle. And the animals have been coming back, but there is a lot of work to do with this land. And this is, like I mentioned, I went to the American Renewable Energy Symposium, our day conference this past weekend. I've been looking at what we can do to heal the earth and work with the land. And this is exactly what we need.
And the incredible thing about it, the impulse of life towards healing is if you can give life half a chance, the response is so incredible. And what I'm thinking about now, and what the book I think really touches on, is that I believe that the age of restoration will come off the back end of the age of information. And we are entering into a time where we need to start going into the consciousness of restoration. We need to start to act, and we need to start to tell the story of restoring our connection with the natural world. And it's happening. It's not going to come through some great system. It's not going to come through the current structures. It's going to come through individuals who start to feel that connection back to the natural world, and individuals who learn how to heal themselves. Because, one of the things that I've always been struck by is that a person is like a landscape. And I've worked now with a lot of traumatized people, and when I work with them, what I see is a landscape in front of me. And so often someone who's traumatized, the rain is falling, there's something that they need, but they can't actually take it in. And so when I look at someone who's been through a difficult trauma in their life, who's suffered in some way, and I look at that hardenedness, the way they've closed, what I see inside of them always is a wild garden waiting to be brought back to life. And an act of healing anywhere is an act of healing everywhere. And so when people say to me, oh, well, I don't have a piece of land, I don't have the means to get a piece of land, like I can't be a part of this, you going inside and finding the impulse, There's nothing more healing than finding and sharing your gifts. Going inside and starting to do the work of discovering your unique gifts, starting to let go of the past, you become a part, getting in touch with your own nature, you become a part of a transformation that I believe wants to come to life on this planet right now. When you heal, your nature heals, and those of us who get in touch with nature, I'm thinking of us as the tribe of forgotten trackers. We are those who feel called to the restoration of humanity's relationship with the natural world.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And there was a beautiful book a few years back, it might be about a decade now, by a gentleman by the name of Richard Louv, who wrote The Last Child in the Woods. All right. He was talking about children not so much having attention deficit disorder as much as having nature deficit disorder. And he shared a concept that I believe in very strongly, which is I see us as walking, talking expressions of the earth, or walking, talking expressions of dirt. That's how I see us. We are the earth. We're just standing vertical on it. But we all have our land. In the city, it might be a back alley where there's a little ditch. It might be going down by the water. It might be taking a trip up to Yellowstone, where I got to meditate with this giant herd of bison and just sit down with them for hours. In fact, I started to move, and the, what would you call him, the head bison, the head of his pack, he snorts, he stands up, he looks at me, he snorts, and points his head down for me to sit back down. We can all find a place to connect with the earth. How does it change us when we do so?
I mean, I think it changes us in profound ways. One of the things that I believe is so much of the anxiety and depression we are seeing now is simply undiagnosed homesickness for our connection with the natural world. And, in a society where the individual self is disconnected from the greater whole, the search for meaning is reduced to how am I doing in comparison? And so we live in this comparative environment, and we're always trying to discover how we are doing against everyone else. And that's incredibly isolating. And that takes us out of belonging. What happens in a natural environment and when we connect with nature is we discover ourselves in a relational fashion. We start to feel ourselves in connection and in relation to something else. And inside of that connection, we start to feel ourselves as a part of something that is intelligent, something that is alive, something that is aware of us. And when we start to sense, and it's a very subtle feeling, it's a kind of presence, a merging of our presence with the presence of something alive around us. Well, inside of that, we start to experience a very fundamental belonging. And I think that until we can rediscover our sense of place with each other and rediscover the way that meaning arises in our life almost innately, you don't have to work for it when you go into a state of union with other sentient beings. I'll tell you a little story, Michael. There's a place in northern Zimbabwe where I was about a week ago now. And it's a place where you get these incredibly huge baobab trees. I don't know if you've ever seen an image of a baobab tree. They sometimes call them the upside down tree. Yeah. But I was tracking a lion, and this lion led me through some beautiful cathedral mapanis, and then in the center of these, alone for miles in many, many directions. And it's such an interesting thing to feel yourself absolutely alone, but to feel no loneliness, to feel absolutely connected with everything around you. And in the center of this little clearing, there was a huge baobab tree, maybe 30 foot tall. I measured the base. It was 18 meters wide. I don't know what that is in feet, but I mean, this incredible specimen of a tree. Yeah. And years ago, an elephant had knocked a huge section of the bark off of that tree, and it worked his tusk in there to eat some of that inner pulp. And then termites had entered there, and they've actually hollowed the entire base of this tree out. So it's this incredible, central column, hollow column, maybe 30 foot wide. And in the top of that tree, a swarm of bees has made their nest. And as I walked to the base of the tree, I could hear the bees, the frequency of the bees, they're buzzing in the top of the tree. And this incredible hum is traveling down the base of this 1,000-year-old didgeridoo, and the vibration was coming out of where the elephant had knocked a hole in the tree, and I could feel the vibration striking me right in the center of my chest, and I could feel the collective energy of the bees, and I could feel it amplified by this ancient cathedral of the tree. And in that moment, I knew something very, very important was happening, that there was no rational understanding to it. Something in my body understood that I was receiving a kind of information. I was receiving code through a vibrational field, a field of connection, a field of presence. And it was full of just something old. And in that moment, the only way I could describe it is in that moment, in relation to those bees, in relation to that tree, in relation to that forest, I felt a very old part of myself. I felt a very deep part of myself. And I felt a part of myself that I wouldn't have been able to get to outside of the relation with all of that life around me. And I think that feeling of connection, while it is strongest for me in nature, it is simply the ability to be present enough to feel the life force around you. And so even between you and I, thousands of miles away, we can feel the connection between us. And if you live in a city and you walk out and you feel, you can, and you start to sense the presence of the trees on the street, and even the presence of someone else around you, beyond the label and the name, the feeling underneath it, that one unified feeling of sentience. And I think in what we are looking for is to reconnect to that one language of feeling. And inside of that, we get to know ourselves again. It rehumanizes us. In a funny way, it takes us out of ourselves, but more into what it means to be a person, to live relationally, to belong to something larger, to be inside a kind of unfolding intelligence.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful image that you shared. And to me, what it does, first off, I want to be there. Secondly, it takes us out of, I wasn't planning on using this term today, but I am. And we talked about it in the beginning. People come back from trips with you and they say, we're going back to the real world. And we both agree, the natural world, what's left of it, and we need to do everything to restore it. That is the real world. But I'm going to use an interesting term here, intellectual war. When we're in the city, when we're sharpening elbows, when we see everybody else as I've got to push them away and I've got to get mine to survive, we are doing warfare with our mind. When we're going back into the center of this tree, into the center of the didgeridoo, we're actually going back into the center of our hearts. There is no war there. It is a connectedness. I imagine if you're tracking on the savannah as a savannah and you have the most incredible story and stories in your book, and you were to see a lion, a leopard, a snake, a bird, and anything, to the people around you who you're tracking with, you're not going, oh, I saw this first, it's mine. You're going, psst, psst, look. And it might even be without a word, that you're with your eyes or just a thought, you're calling them in because of that relational connection rather than the separation.
And just to build on what you're saying, because you're so right. And there's a beautiful quote by St. Francis. He says, wherever you go, preach the gospel. When absolutely necessary, use words. And what he was obviously a nature mystic. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you're out there with the animals and in a group, you're naturally the natural world is a wordless environment. And so what happens is the wordlessness starts to, as you go into wordlessness, as you move out of the thinking mind that wants to label and name and understand, as you start to move out of that, you start to move into a field of presence, of silent presence. And within that field of silent presence, you don't have to name and understand. And it's not about intellectual knowledge. It's about a state of feeling. And inside that feeling, as you go into wordlessness, as my teacher used to say, as you go into wordlessness, you naturally go into oneness. And as you go into oneness, innately meaning starts to arise. There is something, there's not, you don't have to work for it. You don't have to be mindful. You don't have to try and understand it. Just right there, there is the meaning of everything is just present inside that kind of oneness. And I call that the one language. And I feel like, even what you described earlier when you were telling me about your encounter with a mountain lion, you stopped, you made eye contact, and then slowly you lowered your head. You were communicating. You said everything that needed to be said, but you said it in a field of presence. And I think so much of what my work is about now is helping people rediscover that place inside of themselves where inside of that presence there is connection. There is connection to the greater world. And there is also innately, out of that field of presence, an understanding of your part in it starts to arise. And it becomes very personal in that way because you start to be aware inside of that kind of stillness how you are here to serve. And I think I've just gone way off topic, but I feel like learning
you were perfectly.
Learning to feel again is, there's this funny concept, and Jung described it. Carl Jung, the psychologist, he described it as, the right path and the left path. And the right path is the path into culture, and he said, and I must say that I do not decry this in any way, but when you inside the right path, there is a clearly laid out, defined path for yourself, and he said inside of that, you can live a very respectable life because it has a framework and a structure. You know how to fit into it, and you will be respected inside of that. And then there's the left path, and he called that the path of following your bliss. And, people talk about this all the time. Oh, follow your bliss. But what they don't know is that Jung said, follow your bliss. And there's a very real chance that you won't be respected because people won't understand what you're doing. And there's a good chance that it'll be a strange life, but it'll be your life. And one of the keys is I think what's happened is that the right structure now, the structures of sort of culture, we've reached a point where they've become so affected by the consumeristic culture that they're not actually feeding and nourishing people anymore. They're not actually creating community. They present you with a set of ideals, and then you spend your time chasing to try and achieve that ideal. And either you don't and you feel bad about yourself, or you do and you realize that the ideals it presented you with were not actually fulfilling. And so there's so many people inside of that now. So the left path is becoming a path that is very important. And the reason that I wrote the book about tracking is because I think we're in a time now where we need people to start to transition out of the right path into the left path. People who can get in touch with a feeling inside of them, a wild place inside of them, and begin to follow it like a tracker. Because people who start to live differently, people who start to live on the feeling of their bliss, it's difficult. There's no structure. It's scary at times. You have to learn to follow the track of your inner guidance. It can be difficult, but people who learn to do that, they make new ways of living. And I think we're in a time now where we need people who are courageous enough, and I'm calling them the tribe of forgotten trackers, who are willing to go and follow something hard to define, something that comes from within, something that is inside of a feeling, to make it a more simple, more connected way of living. And that's what this book is essentially about. And that's what my mythology is, to say you are a tracker. You have a wild place inside of you that knows. You have a unique gift and a medicine to share. You have to learn its track. You have to learn its trail. You have to learn how it speaks inside of you. And people who follow that become activists of a new way of being.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's dive into this, and it's fascinating. I want to talk about the tribe of forgotten trackers. It's interesting. I was at this R-Day convention, this American Renewable Energy Day symposium this past weekend, and there were some kids, particularly some kids with indigenous blood and indigenous wisdom in them, who were talking, the Gen Zers. The Gen Zers get it. They get that the, quote, real world isn't the natural world. And they want to go back. The wisdom is percolating up, and they can't see the benefit in doing it an old way. we can each start to tap into this, as you call it, living on the feeling of our bliss. How do we begin to tap in and to find the oneness on our own trail?
Okay, well, here's the amazing thing about it. Let me maybe start like this. When you track an animal, what I started to realize being apprenticed by these incredible trackers where I grew up, and particularly by Renius, a man who was a Shangaan tracker, is I started to realize that this ancient art form that has to do with the art of following an animal across a wilderness, well, what it's actually about is, at its core, is about finding what you're looking for. It's about finding. And great trackers consistently find animals in huge terrains that would be like a needle in a haystack. They learn to find things. And so at first I was tracking, and then I started to realize that the mentality and the approach of the tracker had so much to teach us in all sorts of dimensions of our lives about finding what we're looking for. And so, when you go out to track a lion in a huge wilderness, well, one of the first things is that a tracker goes without knowing. Trackers build a relationship with the unknown. Mm-hmm. So many of the people who I've coached, so many people who I've worked with have told me, when I know exactly what the next thing to do is, then I'll start making change. Like when I know exactly what my next career move is, when I know exactly when the next job I'll get is, then I'll make the change out of this thing that's crushing my soul. And, what I say is, if you want to be a tracker, you have to start to develop a relationship with the unknown. You have to start to let the unknown, instead of scaring you, because the whole culture sold you the story about security, you have to be secure. You have to start to let the unknown bring you to life. And you have to start to let that unknown actually tune you in and turn your attention on, which is what happens with the tracker. The next thing, as trackers, we go without knowing. The next thing that we need is, particularly if you're tracking a lion, a single lion that has moved across a vast wilderness, well, we need a first track.
Yeah.
Man, and if we can get a first track, then we can get a next first track, and then a next first track. And the skill of the tracker is to dial down the infinite and vast possibilities of where that animal might have gone to a first track, and then a next first track. And so what I say to people inside of this tracking model is, find the smallest first steps, first tracks you can make towards change. People who make small daily changes towards being more in touch with the feeling, what feels a little bit better? What feels a little bit better? People who do small changes consistently are people who ultimately really start to change direction. And so you're going to need a first track. You're going to need to develop what I call track awareness. And so there's a story in the book you may remember. When I was a boy, Renius, my teacher, would take me to a game path, and he would say, walk down the path, come back and tell me what you see. I'd come back and I'd say, well, I saw there's tracks of a herd of impala here. And he would say, Fambalangutam futiamfo, go look again, my friend. And I would go back and I would look and I'd say, okay, there's, the tracks of a herd of impala. And then I saw the tracks of where a squirrel ran across the road. And then actually underneath the tracks of the impala, it's been washed out a bit by the herd of impala that walked over. A hippo walked down this path. And he would send me back again. And each time I walked down the path, there was new information. And I felt like I was tuning myself to see more and more. And I realized that, you could send someone down that path that is full of information and they could miss it if they weren't a tracker. But as a tracker, we were teaching ourselves to see the signs that were there. And when I started working in the personal development field, that idea became incredibly, incredibly important. What we call developing track awareness, because you can get a first track, but what you also have to do is you have to start to teach yourself to see your track. And this is where the process becomes really, really interesting. And I can sense that you've been living on the left path for a long time, so you know what I mean. But if you start to set an intention, you start to pay attention, you will start to see the things that expand your energy. You will start to be aware of the people who make you feel energized. You will start to your eye will start to catch things that you're interested in. And literally, attention and awareness is almost like a magical thing. If you set out each day to say, I am looking for what brings me to life, I'm looking for my track, the intention to look for it, you will start to see it, and you will start to teach yourself what your track looks like. And one of the things that you see working with people who've come out of very rigid corporate structures, who are in big job transitions, is the minute they get the idea that I am a tracker and I am looking for my unique path, I am looking to share my unique gifts, just by starting to set that intention, they're starting to tune in. They're starting to see the information that is there, but they're teaching themselves to see. So you have to develop your track awareness. The next thing that's going to happen if you're following a lion out in the wilderness is you go into what I call the following state.
Yeah.
And, what I used to see with my teacher, these two incredible mentors who I had, Alex and Renias, is when they went into the following state, they were starting to tune into the track, and they were starting to move across the landscape, and they're not seeing, clear pug marks of the animal. They're seeing the tiny front toe. They're seeing a little bit of the scuff mark of the back pad. The animal is moving across the landscape, and they're vectoring with it. When it's changing direction, they're changing direction. Sometimes they go off the track, and then they readjust. They're waypointing to trees up ahead of them to get a sense of the way the animal is moving. And all of this is happening incredibly fast. They've trained themselves to see their track. They're in tune with the way the animal is moving. They're listening for alarm calls. They're tuned into the bird language. And all of this is happening fast in a dynamic way. And to watch these two trackers move is just like, it's like a meditation in mastery. They are telling the story of that animal moving by its track. They can tell you the speed it's moving by the way that the paws hit the ground, the gait of the animal. And they're going into a kind of energetic resonance with the animal as it moves. Now, how does this translate into the metaphor? It's what I call the following state. Mm-hmm. As you go on this journey to start to find this thing that you're looking for, you have to be comfortable with the unknown. You have to teach yourself to see your track. You're going to need a first track. You're going to go into the following state. The following state is defined by what I call constant creative response to what is occurring. So now you are on the trail of something very unique inside of you, but it's changing, and you need to pay attention. You need to make small adjustments. You need to be aware of where things are moving. You need to be aware of where you're really in tune. You need to be aware of where you're coming out of tune. So it's a state of awareness where you are making constant iterative adjustments towards that feeling place inside of you. And you're tuning into the way that wild of place inside of you speaks. And I believe that, one of the things about being a part of nature is that a lion knows how to be a lion. A leopard knows how to be a leopard. Trees know when to bloom. There is a wild place inside of you that knows what you're here to do, that knows what your mission is. And as you get into the following state, you start to be in tune with how that wild place inside of you speaks. You start to know the activities that take you close to it. You start to know the feeling of being in your authentic self. You start to be in touch with when your gifts are flowing out of you. You start to sense the people. And then when you go off the track, you start to realize, oh no, wait, this isn't my path. And so that's the following state. And again, it may sound like I'm talking in kind of abstractions here, but it works with the intention to be aware of it. Once you start saying, I am looking for something I want to follow, I'm looking for my authentic life, it will start to speak to you in ways that are mystical almost, and they're practical, but there's something mystical about opening to your unique path, and the way that then the intelligence of nature and life starts to put things in your path, and you start to tune in as your field changes. Things in life start to show up for you, and it starts to help you know what you're tracking.
I imagine if you're out there tracking, and suddenly, let's throw a dirty little S word in there. All of a sudden, you go, I should have gone that way. How far are you knocked out of resonance?
Well, this is exactly it. It's you will know that you are out of your wild self and in your social self when you should or you have to. Everything in your body is saying no, but well, I really should. I really have to. And, I'm not talking about shunning your responsibilities, because when you actually show up for the things that you meant to show up for, it's going to make you feel solid. It's going to be an authentic, integrous place inside of you. But if you are endlessly doing the things that you should be doing, you're going to feel the weight of that should, because it's not coming from a place of integrity. It's coming out of an obligation to conform to some kind of, social norm. And when you conform to social norms in a society that is rapidly becoming sick, you start to make yourself crazy. So, I just want to clarify that there's no shoulds in nature. You don't see leopards and lions lying around and say, well, we really should hunt today, or we really haven't been disciplined about our hunting. No, it comes out of pure alignment inside of them. And there is an integrous place inside of you that knows what it's meant to do. And it'll show up for its responsibilities because it'll feel solid to show up for them, not because it should show up for them.
I like to ask people, as I'm starting to help them dial into this and to tune this in, on the most basic thing, does it feel light? Does it feel heavy? If I can just get that basic concept, we're going to start to get on track. In fact, let's go from there. You had mentioned first tracks earlier. Let's talk about helping people get on first tracks. So you're sleeping in the middle of the night and you hear this piercing roar of the lion. You grab Renius, you grab Alex. How do you start? How do you find your first tracks?
Well, out there in that pre-dawn light, when the lion roars, Renius does an interesting thing. He stands up and he turns towards the direction of the roar and he cups his ears. And I know what he's doing. He's throwing a mental stone out over the wilderness, and he's throwing it, miles and miles and miles. And in his mind, he's trying to drop it down on where that lion is roaring.
Yeah.
He's giving himself something to aim for. So for you, wherever you are, if you want to start tracking, the first thing is to become still. You have to start to slow down, and you have to start to relax your nervous system. If you look at a predator in the wild, if you watch a lion or a leopard, I'll try and do the imitation for you here, but it's bad. You see complete calm. The body is soft. They're relaxed. And then, as they hear a sound, from this absolute relaxation, they tune in. And then, no, nothing there, completely back to soft and relaxed. And we rev our nervous system nonstop. We have to learn to relax our nervous system. We have to start to get still, so that when something that is for you crosses your scape of awareness, it will catch your attention. And it may be interesting. It may be an image. It may be a photo. It may be another person and the way they speak. Have you ever had that feeling where someone's talking and you feel yourself sitting forward in your chair? You feel like an energy rise up in you, and you're looking at them like something about what they're saying is grabbing me, So if you become still and you start to tune in, you will start to see what grabs your attention. And your wild self will start to show you what you want to pay attention to. And that will start to give you a sense of what you want to move towards. Another thing that you could do is just spend the time discovering an authentic yes and authentic no. And really, this will take you to some incredibly wild places. When someone asks you to do something, go into yourself and find what's actually there. Let a true no come out of you, or let a true yes come out of you. And don't go into the consequences of it. And start to see what happens when you live your life with an authentic yes and authentic no. Because, some people say, well, if I did that, I might be selfish. No, inside that kind of integrity, what I discover is you start to become someone who is solid. You start to become someone who is authentic, and you start to, when you say no to things that are an authentic no inside of you, well, that's a yes to yourself, and you start to build up a kind of energy that actually wants to overflow and serve. And so you will change your life if you just start saying yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no. That's going to start to put you onto a wilder track, So those are two little things that you can start with.
And when you do that, when you say yes to yourself in what is considered a selfish act, I put that in quotes, it is the most selfless thing that you can do, because the more authentic you are, like you say, the more urge to serve, the more you're connected to one mind, to consciousness, to being a part of the whole, rather than feeling like you have to fight against everyone and everything. And that's the least selfish thing we can do.
That's a kind of freedom. That's a kind of freedom that I think we're in desperate need of. And, we live in an incredibly narcissistic time. And we live in a time where the authentic life has been distorted by all of these kind of, twisted Instagram versions of living your best life. And that's not what I'm talking about. When you start to really track, when you start to follow, when you start to get in touch with that authentic, wild place inside of you, when you start to live as a part of the tribe of forgotten trackers, I believe it's a type of activism in these times.
Yes.
Because, it's like a kind of tuning fork, like someone who discovers a really authentic path, a really authentic life, and they start to really inhabit that. What I see is that those people, they tend to go towards a real kind of simplicity. A natural desire to share starts to arise in them. A kind of abundance starts to flow out of them. People who are really in their authentic expression, they're not trying to protect what they've created, the path they're on. It's just coming out of them because there's enough. And so I feel like we live in a time where those of us who are willing to start to say, I'm not prepared to live inside the model that culture is offering. I want to go for a different definition of success, a much more self-defined definition of success. Those people are going to drive a kind of change. And it's a change, and I know this is a huge part of your work. It's a change that is coming out of a whole lot of individuals collectively seeking a different way of being. And so it's almost like a decentralized movement. This is not one thing to get behind. It's millions of different people starting to live differently and to define what is important differently, and to start to put experience and connection over consumerism, acquisition, and stuff. And I heard a statistic a little while ago. I don't know if you've heard this, but Eckhart Tolle believes that there are probably about 30 million people in America in the awakening process, and I just think that's an interesting number, and it's time for all of us to awaken to just a different way of living.
My wife and I are building we have a One Mind program, a One Mind Earth program that we're building so that we're estimating about 10% of the population of the planet to all come together and meditate together online and see if we can get a critical mass, because we've got hundreds of thousands of listeners ourselves. So if we draw in from all of these other audiences, that we can get this critical mass. He's right, about 10%. I was saying 777 million people. If we can get them all having this similar thought, we can shift this place. And it comes back to an image now I have of the savannah, where you're saying we each go on our individual paths, but something popped in my head as you said individual paths and I'm sure you felt this. Have you ever been around a flock of birds? I'm talking thousands of birds at once, and tuned in and felt it, because I can literally feel pulling to the right, pulling to the left. We're diving forward. We're each individual. Each bird is completely individual on its own life path and working together as one.
I mean, I I mean, I've told the story before. I don't know if it's appropriate for now, but I am also someone who has been badly attacked by a swarm of bees once during a beekeeping incident gone wrong. And what was incredible is that inside this swarm of bees, I felt this incredible collective energy as they were all around me, stinging me. I was running for my life. It was just like it was a moment of
I've gotten dozens in the belly. I've gotten dozens in the belly when a kid took a golf club and threw it into a hive, and the hive said, "Hello, Michael."
And I mean, they are absolute. Bees are. I realized that day because I was really trying to learn about their way.
Yeah.
I realized the first thing they taught me was let's kick off with respect, And they just gave me an incredible lesson in respect. But what I felt inside that collectiveness is that in a beehive, every individual bee reacts to local stimuli, and basically serves the information it's getting on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah.
And then as a number of bees do this, you start to get a kind of algorithm activating in the hive. And then as individual bees react to local stimuli, suddenly a critical mass is reached, and there's this incredible algorithm that fires through the hive, and there's a change. Mm-hmm. And so what we are talking about is individuals consistently seeking the path to the authentic life, the path to their own awakening. And the litmus test for awakening is always gratitude in some ways, because when you start to be in a life that feels on track, in service, the sort of byproduct is that natural gratitude. And I think if enough of us can do that, we can fire the algorithm for something different. And that is where the age of restoration will come from. And what I love now about what your mission is, and I was watching your conversation with Dr. Joe Dispenza, is there's an incredible, we're finally getting the apparatus to start to measure the power of this collective morphogenic field. Yes. And the way that it can affect when we go into a state of cohesion together. And change somewhere is the opportunity for change anywhere. And part of what I believe we're doing in South Africa and the restoration of the land is we're showing we can, and we're showing in one tiny place that we can rebuild our connection with the natural world. We can reconnect with the animals. And in that way, it becomes a living possibility. There is a place where we're doing it. And all over the world, I'm seeing an emergence of what I'm calling the pockets of light. And it sounds like your house is one too. Just people all over the world creating small pockets of connection, small pockets of reconnecting with the natural world, small pockets of drawing in community, small pockets of living differently. And in these pockets of light, we are visualizing a different way of being, and that's our way of trying to fire the algorithm.
Woohoo!
and tracking this book is a call, and it's also it's a call to people who I know feel this, who know that they are a tracker, who know that they are here to be a part of a transformation in consciousness. And I'm sending out the call to them to say, you are the tracker, but your path will be different. It's not about your path is a path of going inward, and it'll come through. There's unique gifts for you to share. And it's an individual path, but it's a path that's connected in some unique way, if that makes sense.
It totally and completely does. An individual and part of the whole. I call it the rose as part of the bush. You are both the bush and you're the individual expression of love as that rose. Can you tell us, what do we do? I want to talk about what do we do when we lose our track in life. So let's say that you're out there, you're tracking a lion, and you hit a dead end. What do you do?
Well, one of the most important things about losing the track is to know that you will lose the track. And the reason I say that is, in like you see all the movies of the tracker, and the tracker drops down and he, tests the scent of the earth and he never loses the track. Like, that's not how it happens. I'm a good tracker myself. I'm out there with some of the best trackers in the world, and losing the track is part of it. And so it's very important to know that, because if you start to go down a different path, you start to follow your track away from what the culture offered you. Mm-hmm. If you start to live on the feeling, Well, it's important to know that you're going to lose the track, because if you don't, when you lose it, you might just freak out and say, oh my God, I've lost the track. This was a bad idea. I don't know what I'm doing. I got to get back there to where I was, where it was safe and I knew how things were going. So the first thing that I say to trackers is losing the track is part of tracking. It's going to happen. When it happens, you come back to yourself. There's two things you can do. One is you go back to where you last had a clear track.
Yeah.
The last time you knew I was on track, what was I doing? Who was I with? What was feeding me in that moment? Okay, that's going to give you a ton of information. How have I gone away from that? That gives you a place to iterate. That gives you a place to make subtle adjustments. Remember, the following state is constant creative response to what is happening. Okay, this isn't working. Let's do something different. And that leads me to the second point, which is when you lose the track, what the great trackers will do is they will keep moving forward and they'll start trying things. They move up to an open game path ahead. They start walking in a zigzag, trying to cut across the track. They check some open ground. And they move in this very relaxed, open fashion. They're gleaning information. They're tuning in. And, anywhere where they don't find a track, they call that the path of not here. It's not wasted. Anywhere where you don't find a track is helping you refine where you will find a track. So when you lose the track, come back to yourself, go back to your last clear track, or keep trying things, iterating, moving forward, being willing to adapt, adjust, take in information, learn, let yourself evolve. The whole model for learning in our culture is obviously like, it's you're right or you're wrong. But to be a tracker is to live in discovery and to let yourself learn and find your path and to be aware and open as you iterate towards this thing. And, when Joseph Campbell and when Carl Jung said, follow your bliss, well, I can tell you, I've lived on the trail of that alive feeling inside myself, and I've lost it at many times, as I'm sure you have. Yeah. We learn how to follow it. We learn how it speaks, that feeling inside of us, that place inside of us that knows, and we lose it from time to time, but we learn to re-find it quicker each time.
And we're finding it quicker by going into our bodies, by feeling what our body has to tell us.
By tuning into our body, by being aware of what we were doing and the state we were in when we were very clearly on track, by being willing to try things, and always by tracking is a discipline of attention. If you pay attention, it's an amazing thing. Many of us look, but we don't see. And, we hear, but we don't listen. When you lose the track, you come back to yourself, you tune in again, you start paying attention. Attention is the discipline of the tracker. And attention will always put you back on track.
It's interesting. So I'm up on, for my birthday 2 days ago, I'm up at about 13,000 feet on this place called Electric Pass outside Aspen, Colorado. And I had passed some people coming down. And I'm not sure exactly what I said to them, but they said, yeah, the trail goes up ahead, but then you'll lose it. Yeah. I was like, oh, okay. And I go up ahead, and the trail was not a traditional trail because it's on a mountaintop, scree-field rock, but it's there as clear as day to me. And without judgment, it was maybe the presence that I was bringing to it, that the track is laid out before you. And if we bring that presence, then at least that next step, just that next step, is actually, I'm going to divert here. You mentioned Joseph Campbell earlier, and one of my favorite quotes you have in this whole book.
I don't know where I'm going, but I know exactly how to get there.
Bingo. And then I don't know where I'm going, but I know exactly how I'm going to get there, and I'm going to throw that with Joseph Campbell's quote. If you can see your whole life's path laid out before you, then it's not your life's path.
That's the way of the tracker. And, it's this is not a romantic path. Like, it's not like, again, it's not this version of like, I'm going to go live my best life. No, if you want to live like this, it requires an ability to, face a lot of unknowns. It means that you're going to have to build your own structures. It's not going to come to you from somewhere else. You're going to have to build your own structures. You're going to have your own disciplines. you're going to have to constantly be tuning in, iterating. It's a brave path, and the archetype of the tracker is the one who is willing to go, the one who is willing to take up the mantle to find a way. And so it is a brave path. I should say that I don't offer this lightly, because for those people who want to live on the left path, for those who want to transition out to the right, man, it is going to test your courage, because it's a brave way of living, and it's living with a ton of unknowns. But if you are present inside of it, it will take you to a life that is more your own than what the culture is offering you.
What you're talking about is what you call plugging into your wilder self, or to your wildest self. To me, and this is my bias because I'm on that left side of things, I guess, it seems much scarier to live a, quote, secure life, I put that in quotes, on the couch without tapping in and asking, who am I? Why am I here? What am I meant to do? Not this one purpose. Like, that's another intellectual danger zone of thinking there's this one purpose, and if I don't do that, my life's a mess. But if I don't plug in, that to me is the scariest thing in the world.
And one of the great blessings of my life is I sat in through my 20s, and even through my late teens, and then into my 20s, I sat in ceremonies, and I sat in circles, and I sat in life coaching groups, and I was hungry to understand how healing happened. I was hungry to understand how personal transformation happened. And I always thought that I was going to be a conservationist, but when the idea that the restoration of the planet will come out of a profound shift in human consciousness hit me, I felt a path open up for myself, and I knew my path would involve in some way a transformation in consciousness. And one of the ways that we transform our consciousness is to heal. And so I tracked that. I went and found the teachers. I sat in those circles. And it's an amazing thing through your late teens and 20s to sit in circles with people who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s and even their late 40s, and to hear them talk about, where they're at in their lives, and the hunger inevitably for, more connection, the hunger for a deeper connection with themselves, for an expression of their uniqueness, the creative gifts. And I just knew that that we're out of balance. And I don't decry more traditional models, but if you're a merchant banker, if you're in the insurance field, none of that is wrong, but just make sure you also take the time to learn to feel, and take the time to learn to tap into what's feeding you. We need everyone in this journey, but I think more and more we're realizing that we have to find the humanity of living more in touch with ourselves and with what actually feeds us, which is inevitably experience, connection, creativity, union, community.
Woohoo! So, Boyd, I want everybody to go out and buy this book, buy a dozen copies, give it to everybody you know. And where can people go to find your beautiful book, which when this airs, they're going to be able to pre-order? And where can people go to find your beautiful book and to find out more?
Absolutely. The book will officially be in stores from the 22nd of October, but you'll be able to get it online wherever books are sold, pre-order already on all of the platforms. It's available on Amazon. It's available on pretty much all of the platforms that you can buy books on. There's also an Audible version. And I think, this book, I hope it to be a rallying cry and a call to all of those of us who want to make a different way of being in the world. Awesome. And so I hope you will enjoy it. And I hope you'll enjoy, taking a walk through the African woods with me, because essentially that's what the book is. It's a chance to go tracking and to start to take those lessons back to your life wherever you are.
And Boyd, I literally want to do that. I want to come down there. I want to do this with you.
We got to get you on the tracks of a lion or a leopard at some point. it's such a beautiful piece of storytelling, and there's such an intimacy to spending a whole day with that animal via its tracks, and then maybe at the end of the day just getting a glimpse of it and knowing that you've told that animal's story by following it all day, and being in touch with that. When you're tracking,
Yeah.
and I know we're running out of time, but when you're tracking, you are connected with every ancient person who knew this art form. You are connected back through the energetic lineages. You are in tune with something that is so old and that humans have done for hundreds and thousands of years.
Woohoo! That's like layers of resonance. I'm thinking of resonance, like when you speed up, when you quicken, when you're on the lion's pace, you're in resonance with how they're moving. And now you're talking with being in resonance with millions of years of humanity, millions of years of the story of the earth as well.
Millions of years of the story of the earth. That's so beautifully said.
So I want to see if you have any final words of wisdom, and I'm hoping we're running a bit over. I'm good on time. I want to check if you are to have time for a little meditation in here.
Yeah, I would, love to do a little meditation with everyone. That would be great.
So first off, any last words of wisdom you want to share with people?
I want people, if they take something away, I would say this: there is a wild part inside of you that knows what you're here to do. And there's nothing more healing than discovering your unique gifts and sharing them with the world. And if you start to track that and just start paying attention, it is going to start to present itself to you. And be brave and follow it, because it's going to nourish you in ways you can't imagine yet.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That is a mighty woohoo!
Thank you.
So then, would you have time for a meditation? And any length you'd like. This has been phenomenal. I can air the extra time. This has been so worth it.
Absolutely. And, maybe if at this moment we just close our eyes, and
unless you're driving down the road.
Unless you're driving down the road. And I would like to, connect very, very deeply with the energy of my home, the energy of a landscape restored. And wherever you are, I want you to feel through the energy field to a wild place. Feel to a wild place somewhere out there in the world, and feel to a wild place that exists deep inside of you. And now I want you to tap into the image of a slow-moving, powerful river. And I want you to feel the current of that river moving through your own veins. I want you to feel the wildness in that water. I want you to feel how it's never been bottled. It's never been piped. It's never been in a system. It is water that has come straight out of the earth and has traveled a journey through wild, untouched terrain. And I want you to feel it flowing inside your own veins. And then from the base of your spine, rising up through your back, feel the presence of a mighty tree you know. Feel the presence of its ancient wisdom. Sense its being in your own being. Feel the generations of wisdom that it has carried. And feel that wisdom as a part of yourself. I want you to know that right now, a whale is breaching somewhere in a vast ocean to breathe the same air that you breathe. I want you to know that many things are changing. Many great mysteries are giving way to the menial. That if you can find the wildness of the river and the tree and the whale, if you can sit in that wildness in your own being, if you can let that wildness live through you, if you can let that wildness guide you, then you will be okay. And you will be a part of a great change. All you need do is feel your own blood. All you need do is feel the longing of your own heart. All you need do is glimpse one starlit sky. All you need to do is breathe into a nervous system that looks like the delta of a river entering the ocean. All you need to do is fill the bronchioles of your lungs that are like the branches of trees. All you need to do is be still enough to listen to what is calling you inside. If you do that, then you will be wild and you will be okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Boyd.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
This
It's been a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for the way that you're changing the frequency through your message.
It goes both ways. I really do mean it. I want everybody to go out and get your book. I love it. I love the message you're sharing. We talked about it beforehand, and maybe I said it on air. We are walking, talking expressions of the earth. You are a walking, talking bridge. We're both bridges, and ambassador of the earth, of the resonant frequency, of the wisdom that is and of and bathes each one of us, but that we sometimes get lost and forget. And you're helping us, Boyd, to remember.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to be a voice for nature.
Awesome. Got to crank it back up for the finish here. I'm in such a beautiful, solemn place now. I love where you brought us. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the Lion Tracker's Guide to Life, and discover your own inner tracks today, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Boyd.
Thank you, and thanks to your listeners, and for having the opportunity to be a part of the show.
Oh, it is all our honor, our pleasure, and I am hoping that the audience is giddy with delight as I am from this one.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I just had the most phenomenal time talking with Boyd Varty, and one of my all-time favorite interviews. To find out more about your own inner tracker and connecting with your wisdom and purpose, click here, subscribe below.